we're going to take a look at some storage units. These are mini storage that have gone on lean. They're being put up at auction. Some hints and some ideas on what would make each of these good or bad from a sourcing standpoint. We're going to actually take a detailed look at some delinquent storage unit auction hosting sites. We're going to compare the two. One of them, not that popular in my area, only had one single listing. The other, 10 pages if I was willing to drive a little bit. They even had one in my hometown. We'll assess whether they would be good to consider compared to the price that they're currently bid at, and what some of the pitfalls or hints might be. This is Brian. I'm at the lake. We've had a break in the weather. We're headed up to Renton, but that's a topic for another day. Storage units are an interesting game. It's probably one of the best ROIs out there, but it is a lot of work. Because whenever you buy storage units, and it's been a while since we've done it, but for about a decade, this was how I primarily sourced. So you've got to consider the size of the unit, the volume, how you're going to transport it. You've got to consider how much the trash to cash ratio is. Are you going to have to make a dumpster run? What can you see in the unit? What can you identify that would make it interesting enough and valuable enough to actually bid above whatever the last bid was? I've split this off into two videos. So at the end of this video, I'll put a link to the original, because this is the second in the sequence about delinquent storage auctions. In the first one, we took a look at vaults and pods. We took a look at dry boxes. And we took a look at the facilities, the way a U-Haul might run a mini storage and rent vehicles and rent pods. Well, in this one, we're going to concentrate on the websites, the hosting websites for delinquent storage unit auctions. Because I think back to when I used to do this every week, and there were always considerations like that. How much was I paying for the unit? Where I was going to put it? When I was going to schedule a pickup? How much cleaning and effort was going to go into it, how I was going to resell the contents. Because when you start playing with storage units, it's a whole different game than showing up at an estate on a Sunday morning and buying a few items, or even a curated auction, because you get it all, wall to wall. This is Brian. We're at the lake. Let's take a look here. If you find this topic of interest, even though it's been a while since I've bought one, maybe I'll buy another one in the spring so I can show you the process. But I still get the emails from the auction sites, and I still like to open them, take a look, and play along with the game. Would I buy these if I was still buying storage units? And for those of you at home who have been considering storage units, you can even say out loud, I'd buy that one, or don't do it, Brian, don't do it. Don't you bid on that. Because one of the challenges right now is our buildings are pretty full of backstock and listed inventory. So right now I don't have the space, especially in the winter, for storing the contents of a storage unit auction. But I still like to look. It's that old pull from when you used to do something and it made you money and it went well. When a mini storage facility has a delinquent unit, they've sent out the notices, the time has passed, they can put a lien against it and they can sell it. They can sell the contents to recoup their costs. Typically, they have a choice, depending on your state laws. They can sell them at a public auction. They can sell them to a carter if the value isn't too high and it's allowed in their state. So in other words, they can just simply hire you directly as someone who hauls things off and you can buy them. And I got into that for a while with a few facilities. They can either run the auctions for themselves, or they can hire an off-site auction company to come and do it live in person to a crowd. And that's the way I started in the business. Now, most of these facilities have shifted their business online. They use host auction sites. Very similar to other host auction sites, they simply are selling the contents of storage vaults or mini storage units. Well, since it's not raining, I thought I'd take a walk while I talked. I don't usually walk and talk. But I noticed that on this first road, four dealers over there, we've got a U-Haul, which can be a big player in the reselling game if you don't own your own truck. And over here, A mini storage facility, which is often a topic of conversations among my videos, because as with many of us, we try to diversify. If one thing is working okay and we got it down, but maybe our profit margins aren't big enough, we start looking for ways to augment that. We take on a new task, we take on a new role, a new platform. We may move from just selling on eBay to taking things to a consignment auction. Or we may decide to run our own auction. And we've got some videos up on the playlist in the series on running online auctions, which you can check out if that's a topic of interest to you. I was doing a little comparison between two different sites, and I was looking at the fact that they're such different platforms. Their function is the same. You know, they want to sell delinquent storage units where the renters have defaulted and not paid the corporation that runs the storage facility, and they want to sell them to bidders and buyers, get them emptied so they can re-rent the facility, because they make their money renting storage spaces. Depending on the laws and the rules in your state, they probably don't make much money or with a unit sitting delinquent full of someone else's property. So they want to get them up on a site. And what I was comparing, and we'll show you on the screen, is how one operation, one hosting site, because these are hosting sites, the facilities themselves or their corporate headquarters engage and pay for space to advertise these delinquent units for sale. They're basically hiring an auction company, except the auction is online. One hosting company, big, well-known, nationwide. I searched and took a look at how many were in my area. There was even one in my own small town here, several in the surrounding area, and it got larger exponentially if I drove an hour or two away. The other hosting site had one. I also didn't care for the way that second site functioned, the ability to look at the photos, because ever since the sale of storage units went online, you're relying almost completely on photos or a video clip of the unit. Used to be you went and stood in the rain, they opened the door, you couldn't break the plane of the entry, but you could get close enough to read what was on the boxes. And what was written on the boxes was sometimes a good clue. It was like a treasure hunt. Of course, the other type, which I'll include a little bit of footage, is vault storage units. Those are the plywood boxes, and they've been replaced in some areas by the pod. But the concept for all three of those storage unit auctions is similar. In fact, the same hosting sites often show them together, run both. They might be a mini storage and a U-Haul and rent pods, all out of the same operation. There's also some crossover on the hosting sites. Nobody says you can't run an auction for the contents of a vault on a regular auction site, as long as the hosting company agrees to it. I used to use the storage facility auctions to clear excess stock about once a year. I was renting storage units. I simply rented one more in the same facility, and I transferred all the stock I didn't want to deal with, put up on eBay, and I would take the pictures of it, and I would run my own auction on a hosting site. Because as long as the hosting site will accept your business, you can run auctions. The same way Rose and I run auctions, curated auctions, on another auction hosting site. So there's a lot of crossover and a lot of versatility, and the game can be played many ways. But we're going to take a look at that today, and we'll do a comparison between them. One of them I think is very well run. The other one just isn't really present in our area. And if you're going to use them, not to go delinquent and have your stuff sold, but if you're going to use them as a seller to clear surplus, you want the one that has the bigger reach to the bigger public viewing audience. And at the end, I'll even compare these storage delinquent unit auctions to a regular curated auction. And you can see the difference. Used to do a lot of it. About 10 years, this was probably more prevalent for me than any other way of sourcing. I'd attend regular brick and mortar auctions and estate sales, but in between, I would buy delinquent storage units. Eventually, it got to be such a large part of our business that I had made some deals with some local storage facilities where they would call me as an alternative to running auctions. And they called, we hauled. I was discussing how selecting an auction as a buyer and even as a seller, one of the things you should look at is how popular they are in the area. Another is how their features are shown to a buyer. This happens to be a storage unit auction, but we're going to compare it because they both arrived in my inbox this morning. Storage treasures. All right. First thing we're going to look at, how they're shown to a buyer. See the photo? Enlarge the photo. You can enlarge it this way as well. You can step from one photo to the next. Now this happens to be a delinquent storage unit on Storage Treasures, but you can see how versatile that site is. Now in contrast, this is a site called Self Storage Auction. It comes up with one auction in my area. And if we click on it to look at it, it opens up, says it's in Bremerton. A photo, the rest of the photos. But let's look at how there's no enlargement. You can zoom here, but it doesn't get any bigger. You have to keep scrolling down just to see the other photos. Awkward. As a buyer, I would say the first auction, much, much easier to interface with. And it certainly shows that the bulk of the people in this arena are using the other site. This only had one auction. So if you were actually using an auction to sell your own goods, which one would you think had better marketing and greater reach? It's just something to think about. As a buyer, you want to use the one that has more attributes because you know your buyers, they probably handle a lot more money, a lot more units each year, so their software is a bit more user-friendly. It's a bit easier to interface. A quick comparison. Now this Storage Treasures site has been around for some time. Once we moved away from Seebeck and the big barn, where we had thousands of square foot of storage available to the business, we just can't really handle the volume anymore. And of course, as we've aged, the idea of hauling furniture and taking loads to the dump in trailers, it's just not as appealing as it was when we were younger. And by younger, I mean in our 40s and 50s. Still send me emails telling me that they're having auctions in our area. But if we look here, I've set it to search, and that's one of the nice things. You can set it to search a given distance. My zip code, 50 miles, you hit search, it loads up current sales. And then you can start looking at the cities, because there are some cities near me I don't want to take a trailer to. They're just too congested. Anything up near Seattle, it just adds to the inconvenience level. The next thing besides the city is the size, and that along with the photos is going to give you a pretty good idea of the volume you're committing to if you bid on and win. Because nobody says you have to bid. You can be as selective as you want to or buy as many as you want to. If they're smaller, it is sometimes good to buy multiples in the same city. You can see that here. But this one is 10 by 15, this one's 5 by 6. You could buy this one, or you could buy a couple this size, and they would all fill up a truck or fill up a truck and trailer. In some cases, rather than making multiple trips if you were to get multiple units, renting a U-Haul was still an option for us. Even when I had 2 trucks and 4 trailers, if the distance I was traveling was far, it sometimes penciled out to make more sense to rent a U-Haul, simply because I could bring it all back in one trip. And the U-Haul and my gray 3/4 ton truck that I used for hauling trailers, they got about the same gas mileage. And the travel time back and forth was just dead time. So going up there, loading, doing it all in one trip, sometimes I'd rent a U-Haul even when I did own trailers. And at some point, I should probably make a video talking specifically about trucks and trailers. But here you can see the different cities that are around me. tells you when they're closing. Some of them are ready to close in 2 hours. As we work our way down the list, it'll probably lengthen the time. Now let's take a quick look. This is Storage Treasures. Let's look at how many there are in my area. Now these are all within an hour or two. The one we were just looking at is down at the bottom. And you can see at the bottom, there are also several pages here. We enlarge it. Want to enlarge it some more? It's that easy. Want to step from photo to photo? Nice photos. It's a good unit. I'd consider that one. Current price, about $300. There are different ways to sort these. And that one you see is just a mattress. Not something anyone should probably bid on for $10. Because getting rid of mattresses in many areas is an extra expense. Unless they're really pristine coming out of an estate, most people do not want to buy used mattresses. There are exceptions. All right, now this one's a pretty full unit. Current bid, it's a lean unit. Now that we're inside one of these sales, let's take a little closer look. Lean unit means somebody didn't pay their bill. Delinquent is another term you'll hear. This one happens to be a 5x10, so that's 5 foot wide, 10 foot deep. And they're kind of awkward to rent because to get anything in the back, you have to move everything in the front. If the same square footage is made available to a renter and it's 10x5, meaning 10 foot wide and 5 foot deep, they're much more appealing. But the interesting thing about 5x10s is that because they're loaded from the back out and people often put the best things in the back, they then don't go back and rifle through them before they don't pay their rent. So sometimes in the back of these deeper, narrow units, you can find good things. And by good things, I mean the jewelry box, the coin collection, some guns and ammo, tools. All right, the bigger the unit, the easier they're accessible until they're filled up so much that the aisle stops you from getting in. But there's a series of photos and you can look on them. As you look and you compare what you see to the value, you should try to make sure there's at least something visible that will get you your buy-in price back. That lessens the risk. On a good day, you can see enough to make sure you get your buy-in plus your expenses for hauling and trash disposal. Some of these, there'll be no big mystery. You can pretty much see everything. Now you do get the moving blankets in this type of a sale generally, unless there's a specific note that says you don't. And moving blankets are worth about $5 a piece to you if you're going to be loading and hauling. That way when you get a unit that doesn't have any, you've got them to bring along with you from your back stock at home. Now the other thing you can do is you can go through the unit if it's full, and you can set aside the bedding that's in the unit and use it for packing out, because the less you have to transport, the better off you are. Let's look at this Puyallup one. See how the price has jumped? Let's look at the photos and we'll probably see why. It's a 10x14, so right from the start, there's a lot more interest because people can see more. And what can they see? Well, there's a bigger bed, better quality. There's some snowboards. You can see items hanging. It's a bit better organized. And organization is a good clue as to what's in there. Comes with its own hand truck. You can see it right here. So that means you wouldn't have to bring one along. Now some of these facilities, like the ones we used to use, they actually have loaner carts right there by the door to every section. So you actually could do the job without bringing your own hand trucks. Now this is probably what caught people's attention. When you see motorcycle helmets, you start thinking about expensive Harley parts or maybe a full-size motorcycle buried in there. But if that's what your hope is when you see motorcycle helmets, you need to check the rules in your state. In some places, titled vehicles are excluded from the contents of the unit, and they have to be dealt with separately by the storage facility itself. And they tell you, you don't get them. In other places, if it's part of the unit, it's part of the unit. Same is true for firearms. Still a lean unit. Right there. I'm still looking for one that isn't to show you the difference. But over here, another important fact, your clean out time and your sales tax in that area. If you live in Oregon and you're buying storage units just over the state line in Washington, you'd be shocked to find the 10% sales tax. Here's your cleaning deposit. That's what you've got to put up front to make sure that you take everything. And some people think, well, if I leave the hazmat, I leave the waste, I leave the trash, that's worth $100 to me. But often if you do that, you'll get blacklisted and they'll lock out your name and your ability to bid on their auction site. Because one of the reasons the facility is doing this is to get the unit cleared so they can re-rent it to their list of people who want units that size. And here they're giving you a little bit of information. December 2nd, Phoenix. And I believe it's because the headquarters for this website is out of Phoenix. So watch your closing times. It might not be your time zone. 7 p.m. Phoenix time. I'm sitting in Washington State. And most of these sites will take a Visa or they'll take cash. If they're not going to be around when you have an expectation of having it clear, you'll sometimes want to make arrangements to either leave them. If you left them a $100 bill, you'll want to make sure you've got a way to get that $100 back without returning to the facility. That's important if you're 20, 30, 50 miles away from home. You don't want to go back, burn up the fuel just to get your $100 back. Sometimes you can leave them an envelope and they'll mail it. Sometimes they can put it back on your credit card. Sometimes you can send them a photo showing them it's clean, and then they'll do it. Once you get used to, a facility gets used to you, the ones I worked with simply waived the cleaning deposit once I'd done several units at their facility. This one's a double-decker. Somebody put a shelf in the unit. Since they were storing in bags, they put a shelf and they've got 2 layers of shelves. Bags like this normally mean clothing and soft goods. Not always, so look at the photos carefully. And if you're a clothing seller, this is still a very good way to get product. Let's take a look at this Kent unit. Everything's just kind of tossed in, lots of trash bags. Now compare this unit to the one that was right next to it. Now look at the price difference, and you'll see why. This one's all organized in bumblebee totes, the yellow and black ones. It's $300 more than the one with the trash bags that I just showed you. And if we look here, there's not any particular difference in the volume. And you can't tell whether the totes even have anything in it. It's a gamble, because people, whether it's a live auction or an online auction, they're not allowed to enter and look around. The bidders aren't. On this one, the lead photo is a closed garage door, but they've included a few photos to show you. Now there's some tools obviously visible here. There's lots of hazmat. This one closes in 17 hours. Now you can search by category on most of these sites. You tell it you're looking for tools, you tell it you're looking for clothing, and it can narrow down your search. Problem is, it's simply an interpretation by whoever did the listing. What would you call this unit if you were doing it? Household? Furniture? All right, this one is somebody's product. At least all the boxes match. So you're going to have to ask yourself, is it the original new product, and can I tell what it is looking at these? That looks like the word road. That looks like the word ribbon, but I can't really tell. Or have they reused the boxes and packed in miscellaneous household? It sure would be nice to know what was in one of those boxes. See, these looked untouched. And that can be, see how they're all sealed and taped? Depending on what that product is, this could be a very good deal at $160. Now you have to think, on the other hand, somebody defaulted on this unit. So maybe the product wasn't selling so much. Maybe the market was flooded. It wasn't in high demand. It was obsolete. But that's a lot of sealed boxes of the same product. If you were an Amazon seller, whatever this is, could certainly be interesting to ship into Amazon. Now over here is what I was talking about. Your common units are lien units. You can also have charity units. Somebody's decided to turn over the value, the sale, the money that's made to a charity. But I've just clicked on non-lien manager specials and non-lien private seller, because this software also allows you to sell your own stuff. In years past, I've actually rented an additional storage unit when I had several, and I've cleared everything I didn't want to handle, put it in a unit all its own, and said, you don't get the tables, but you get the contents of the unit. And I've started an auction using one of these sites. And I sold it, and a person came and emptied the contents. And it was a short-term rental. I only rented the unit for a week or two. But a manager special is something different, and you're going to want to watch for them, because usually they're not a good deal. Manager special, see it here? Non-lien. This means that the management was cleaning out units to make them rentable again. And what they did is they took one of the units and they took all the crap from all the units that was left over and they piled it all into one unit. And they're running an auction. So it is the random contents from several units. And from time to time you'll get managers, especially if they're resellers themselves, who do a little picking over as they sort out the stuff that was left. So often you can tell manager units are staged to look better than they really are. Now that's not every manager, but it happens in the industry. If you want to exclude them, you just click them off. Now the private seller, that's not bad. Charity doesn't really matter to you because you're the buyer. You don't care who gets the money. And lien unit, we'll hit search and we'll go back. But we have now excluded manager specials. I don't think I've ever found anything good in a manager special unit. And you can see there are at least 10 pages. And if we were to go out, say, to page 5, the time, now it's 6 days. And often the bidding will really come in hot and heavy the last day and the last few hours. Because as I've showed you these, this is a fantastic unit, sitting at $10. And it will get somebody excited and they'll start bidding because here's a paint sprayer, here's an air compressor. This is obviously shop tools. But there's a fair bit of hazmat. You can see leftover paint down here and probably grout. You see some tile cutting systems and some articulated ladders. Here's a texture gun. So this is mostly going to be used equipment, and you have to decide whether you have the time and the space to bring it home and clean it and make sure it's functional after you've tested it. But if you're only paying $10, but chances are if we were to check back in 5 days, this unit would be selling for several hundred. If we come down here and we go out even further, you can see 7 days, 8 days. And there's a big difference between an organized unit like this, it's boxed, it's neat, and a unit where everything has been thrown in. Well, hopefully you found it interesting. You can get to this site, put in your zip code, and look and see what's available in your area. And it's an interesting way to source. It's an interesting way to source volume, and it can really cut your cost per item when you're a reseller. Now, in contrast to the online storage unit delinquent auction I was just showing you, this is an online curated auction. The lots are small. Per lot, they tend to be more valuable. Somebody's already done the sorting. They've curated it. They may have cleaned the items. They may have tested the items. But you pretty much can tell what you're getting if you bid on this type of auction. They're both ways to source, but they're radically different in their approach. This is Brian. I'm at the lake. We've been taking a look at storage unit auctions. This is Brian. I'm down at the packing bench. It's time to do some packing.